What are taglines and what are the different kinds that you can use? Check it out on this episode of How Not to Highline. Hi, I'm Ryan Jinks and welcome to my garage. Today we're going to talk about the different types of taglines that you can use. A tagline is a rope that can take the beating that comes from dragging it across the gap while you connect the two sides of your highline. You don't want to drag your webbing across the gap because you want to keep it as nice as possible, because if it breaks, you're going to die. So you drag a cheap rope or a rope designed for abrasion across the gap and then pull your webbing over to the other side. We'll go over all the tips and tricks on how to manage your tagline in another video, but this one's going to talk about the different kinds that you can use. One option is a climbing rope. It's made to be abrasion resistant, and you might already have one when you're trying to access one side or the other, so you can just use it to pull your webbing across. But if you're not going to already have a climbing rope with you, it's kind of bulky and heavy to take as a tagline, and it limits you to 60 meters. But there are those situations where you want a burly 10 mil rope, 200 meters long, to get over those gnarly gaps. So you still want the benefits of a rope of abrasion resistant. You can rappel with it and build anchors. A nice 8mm rope can suffice just fine in most situations. An 8mm is typically the smallest spec for any progress capture device, such as these rope grabs here, gree-grees, ascenders, things like that, if you were to use them to assist you in pulling the line across. Now let's talk about my new favorite diameter, 6mm. You could buy a 6mm static rope, and you could even buy it with a dynamic core so it's even stronger, and it gives you that versatility that a rope gives you, but I don't need to spend that kind of money because it's expensive for that versatility. So I opted to go with this polypropylene rope I bought on Amazon for $34 for 1,000 feet. This stuff is super cheap, but I mean, it may not last a long time, but yeah, I mean, you can beat this shit up and you won't care. And a safe working load of a whopping 58 pounds, you really can't use it much more than for a tagline. Keep in mind when using this stuff, it does not hold knots very well. It's very slippery. So you kind of have to have some pretty long tails in order for these not to come undone. Another thing to keep in mind before you buy this stuff is that even though it's super light, it tends to be bulky because it doesn't lay down flat very well inside of a bag. 1,000 feet of this stuff practically fills up my small haul bag. Another nice little tidbit to know is even though these progress capture devices, such as the micro traction here, says it only holds 8mm, it will hold your 6mm taglines. Keep in mind this is not designed for a 6mm rope. It's fine for a tagline, but don't use it as something your life is going to depend on attached to a 6mm rope. And yes, you can use anything with teeth on the 6mm rope, such as the ascender here, but you can't use things that pinch a rope like a gree-gree or an eddy. And please do not try to ascend a rope that you bought for 3 cents a foot and is only rated for 58 pounds of force. These things are just nice to use to hold your tagline as you pull it across so it doesn't hurt your hands. So what about AmSteel? This is 1/4 inch 6mm AmSteel, and if you've got a ton of it laying around, could you use it as a tagline? Well, I think that's easier to answer if we just compare the two ropes. They both work in any progress capture device that has teeth, but AmSteel's not really designed to have teeth on it, so it could damage it pretty quickly. These both, because they're both slippery, are horrible with knots. AmSteel's never really supposed to have knots in it. It's supposed to be spliced, and by the way this thing acts, I don't think it is either. You lose a lot of strength even if the knot does hold. This stuff runs $1 to $1.30 a foot, whereas this stuff is 3 or 4 cents a foot. And just like this rope, these are going to get torn up pretty quickly when you drag it across the gap. And this is way too nice of a rope to be dragging across rocks. One nice thing about AmSteel is it lays down really flat in a bag, so it only takes up half the space as the polypropylene rope does. Even though they weigh about the same, AmSteel being slightly heavier, AmSteel will hold about 100 times more than the polypropylene will. But what about a smaller diameter of AmSteel, such as this 3mm? The 3mm AmSteel doesn't really have any benefits over the 6mm other than cost, and you can't use progress capture devices with this stuff. And it's pretty slippery to be hanging on to, so there's really no benefit to using a skinny AmSteel. Which brings us to the kind of tagline that I used for years, 3mm accessory cord, or paracord. Typically, 3mm accessory cord or paracord 550 will hold about 500 pounds of force, and then you lose about half in any knots that you tie in it. Which has been plenty strong for the things that I use it for, which is highlines that are 250 feet or shorter. The number one reason I like using 3mm accessory cord for my tagline for anything 250 feet and shorter is because I have 300 feet of accessory cord flaked in this bag nicely, ready to use, and it only takes up this much space. The main problem with this is that because it's so skinny, it doesn't fit in the progress capture device as well, so you end up having to pull your webbing over manually with your hands, and that does limit how long you can rig with 3mm accessory cord. And for your final option as a tagline that we're going to discuss in this video is a fishing line. Fishing line makes a great tagline for your tagline because it's not practical to be pulling over all your webbing and anything attached to it with just fishing line. If you can't walk around your gap or go down and back up, then this is a great option to cast it like you're fishing, minus the hook, to get it across the gap up to about 200 feet long. Of course, you can't reel in your webbing, but you could reel in a polypropylene rope or a 3mm accessory cord and then pull your webbing across. Another nice use for fishing line, even though I haven't done it myself, is to attach it to a drone. Problem is, you're not always allowed to use drones and it could blow up and maybe get caught in the blades. A fishing line attached to a drone is ideal for anything excessively long as it's allowed. So there's no one right tagline to use for all highlines. I use all these different kind of taglines depending on the situation I'm in. At the rostrum, if I'm doing the shorter lines, I'll use my climbing rope that I use to climb to the other side, or I'll use a fishing line to cast it and bring a tagline over to the far side. At Taft Point, when we just walk around to the other side for the short ones, we'll just use a 3mm line. But when we rigged a 960 footer, we used a 6mm polypropylene rope. And at Vernal, I used all my taglines. We used a fishing line to get across, pulled over bigger lines, and the first time I rigged it, I even used a 200-meter rope that I've got. So you really have to decide what kind of tagline you need based on the highline you're going to go do. And getting taglines across can be pretty sketchy, therefore you shouldn't highline. Hey, don't be a dummy and go rig your first highline after watching a guy in his garage show you how to do it, but instead make sure you go with somebody who knows what they're doing the first time you go out. But in the meantime, check out these other videos and don't forget to subscribe.